Welcome to the Sonic Collective, a music podcast that explores a different album or musical concept each month, diving deep into its history, context, and impact on the music industry. Join our host, Alain, Scott, and Darren Scott, that's way too many Scotts, as they share their thoughts, insights, and personal connections to the music, inviting you, the listener, to discover new perspectives and appreciation for some of the greatest albums and music of all time.
Hey everybody, you are listening to the Sonic Collective. I'm Alain, and this month it was my turn to pick the album we're reviewing. As you probably guessed from the title of this episode, I chose At Home, the second studio album by Dutch band Shocking Blue, originally released in 1969. Now, even if you're not familiar with Shocking Blue, or this album specifically, there's a pretty good chance that you've heard at least one of the songs in another form. Most obviously, there is Venus, which famously was covered by Bananarama in the late 1980s and became a global pop hit. I think it was used on a women's razor commercial, if I recall correctly. Or if you were into Nirvana like I was, you may recall that Love Buzz was covered on their debut album, Bleach. I'm embarrassed to admit this, but I actually only learned very recently that that song was a cover. And so I was curious about what inspired them to choose that song in particular. And so that is when I went and actually listened to Shocking Blue for the first time and Love Buzz specifically. And I was totally not expecting what I heard. Because I grew up with Nirvana and like they're a grunge band, right? Like, so their take on this song is a raw, aggressive, and chaotic punk adjacent rock song, right? Squelchy, noisy breakdown. And I just thought it was kind of just a weird Nirvana song. So when I listened to the original, it's slower, it's more methodical, and it is wildly psychedelic. There's a sitar, a hypnotic bass line, and a trippy breakdown that doesn't really explode so much as spirals outward. I don't know. The contrast stopped me in my tracks between Nirvana's version and this random Dutch band. So after that, I was like, what else do these guys produce here? So I did a quick scan of the rest of At Home on Spotify. It wasn't a proper listen. I just kind of like fast forwarded through tracks. I heard like a few seconds of each. And then I decided, like, this is weird and interesting and complex. I think this would make a really cool Sonic Collective pick. And I think I should probably also buy this on vinyl. So, that's what I did. And by the way, like, Calgary and the surrounding area has no shortage of excellent record shops. And I checked all of them, like, multiple times for months with zero luck. I could not find this album anywhere. So eventually I just got tired of hunting and I ordered it on Amazon. Yeah, so it's been pretty in pink ever since. And basically, it remained unopened until this month when when it came time for me to pick the review. So aside from Love Buzz and Venus, which I had heard before, this album was a fresh listen for me this month, as I'm sure it was for at least a couple of you guys, I'm guessing. But before I get into my thoughts on the album as a whole, I want to toss it over to Darren. Darren, I know you're going to come in hot with your opinion, but I know you also found some interesting historical context around the band and their most well-known song. So I'll throw it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. First of all, great pick. This one really resonated with me for sure. I had heard of Shocking Blue when I was a teenager, 19. I got a job at a nightclub in Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island called Chevy's Rock and Roll Forever. I loved it. I always wanted to be a DJ, and there's only a few clubs. I couldn't get in there, so I got in this place. But it was like 50s, 60s, 70s bar. It was hilarious where you would have like literally as staff, you get up and dance every 15 minutes to like a tabletop or these big routines. It was like cheesy, schlocky, but like super fun job. Long story short, as a DJ there, I got exposed to tons of old classic music. So I learned a ton about that. I remember learning a ton about soul at the time. I'm like, oh, this is where all these kind of like, now hip hop rap songs are coming from. It all came from soul. Like at that time, I had no idea. But one I do remember was this one, Shocking Blue. I remember thinking like, oh, I never knew that was the name of the band. I remember, I think there was a B-side there. There's a couple songs, but that's really all I knew about them. So I knew who they were. I knew they did Venus, but that was the end of it. And man, was I surprised. Like, listening to this album, I just thought it was like really ahead of its time. So I guess to back it up a bit, I mean, this was recorded in 1969 in September, and I guess released then. And I know too, and we did the MC5 Kick Out the Jams album. Go listen to that episode. Interesting one. But that was known as one of the earliest albums ever of what they'll say is punk, that really gave that edgy sound that on and on, like Iggy Pop and others would turn into the punk we know today. But that was in February. So it's interesting that at the same time, over in the Netherlands, there's this Netterbeat culture. The Hague was the big city in the Netherlands that had this big rock resurgence. So inspired by the British invasion in the Rolling Stones, the Beatles, these bands started to kind of take their own version, make it a little more indie, theirs, very similar to what was happening in Germany post-World War II when you kind of, the krautrock revolution started, became, some of the basically forefathers of all these indie and artistic and kind of edgy bands. And the same thing was happening in the Netherlands, maybe not at the scale of krautrock, but learning about Netterbeat was very cool. So the big band is Golden Earring. Radar Love, I think most will know that song, but Golden Earring became big. They were, I guess, the biggest band ever from the Netherlands, probably still to this date. But number two is this group. So, I mean, they were considered sometimes a one-hit wonder because maybe you didn't hear much, and they had a lot of hits just in their few albums there over 5 years. So I think maybe it got lost a bit, but they sold so many albums. Almost reminds me, we did the one-hit wonders and Aha, and you realize actually in Europe and Norway, they had many classic albums, many hits. It's just, Canada and America didn't catch on as much. It does not mean it wasn't an amazing band, and I think that speaks to this as well. Mariska Veres, this was her first album. There was an album before, but man, I fell in love with her in a tick. I remember when we did Dolly Parton, I fell in love with Dolly Parton, but I'm like, she is a beautiful, stunning woman. She wore this, it was actually a wig, apparently, on her head, but had this long, dark hair. If you're sitting there listening to this podcast now, please pull up Mariska Veres, and I think you'll agree that she is quite stunning. But the voice, too, so different for the time, and especially in these rock bands. Females now are still traditionally doing the, Barbra Streisand type of crooning. They're not really in these edgy rock bands, and here she comes out of nowhere. And not only that, but doesn't have a very feminine, I guess traditionally feminine, high-pitched or voice, and not necessarily singing these beautiful harmonies, but coming in with that low register edge. And I just found her vocals alluring. There is, it does sound a bit of the era. One thing that's happening is a lot of the Indian influences that obviously that was George Harrison brought from Ravi Shankar in India. The Beatles and Norwegian Wood started that in the time. Funny enough, we brought it up in our last episode too, but the Gorillaz came up, and their new album, The Mountain, actually is just chock full of this Indian influences again, the sitar and other instruments. And I found that kind of cool. It's like, well, it sounds dated, but funny enough, that sound is actually coming back right now. So a very interesting take, but super edgy. But all the songs were written by the guitarist Robbie van Leeuwen. I'm sorry, Dutch people, we will massacre these names. Yeah, the bass was Klasie van der Wel and Cor van der Beek on drums, and there was actually a piano done or keyboards done in Venus, and that was Cees Schrams or something. I guess never got credit for that, but I will go into that story quick, and I'm going to pass on that because I think I'm loving the album. I can come back tell more, but the one cool thing I did find out, and there's a podcast called The Original, and they go back about the original songs and who covered them, and they have a whole episode on Venus, and it's highly highly recommended. But in this, I was really kind of blown away when the whole episode was about Venus, but they said, the guys just like, oh yeah, no, this was a traditional folk song written literally like 200 years ago that then was turned into a polka like 175 years ago, that then was back into an American folk song that actually got turned back into another American folk song, and then that got copied and put as Venus. And all these songs were considered original, but I guess in the way these classic songs work, if you take kind of these classic traditional songs, change it enough that it's just different with lyrics or whatever like that, actually it is considered an original song. They did not even have to credit any of these past writers or composers of any of those previous songs. But I'm going to let you listen to the clip here now, and then we'll come back quickly. Listen to this.
From Mississippi's Vale, with my old hat there for sale, I crossed upon the cotton bale to my Rose of Alabama. Oh, brown Rosie, she's the Rose of Alabama. The sweet tobacco posy is my Rose of Alabama.
I come from Alabama with my banjo on my knee. I'm going to Louisiana, my true love for to see. It rained all night the day I left, the weather it was dry. The sun so hot I froze to death. Susanna, don't you cry. Oh, Susanna, don't you cry for me. I come from Alabama with my banjo on my knee.
Well, I come from Alabama with a banjo on my knee. Well, I'm heading on up that old Mississippi. Got a little woman waiting for me. Oh, 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 Susanna, don't you cry for me. 'Cause I'm going to Louisiana with a B-A-N-J-O on my knee.
She's got it. Yeah, baby, she's got it. Well, I'm your Venus. I'm your fire at your desire. Well, I'm your Venus. I'm your fire at your desire.
Okay, guys, how crazy was that, right? Like when I heard that, you just hear like, wow, like coming from this polka into like, I'm like, it's like, oh, Susanna, like, oh yeah, I totally remember that, like, oh, Susanna, and you're like, how did the heck did that end up as Venus? Like, that part really blew my mind. So again, thanks to the original podcast, I did extract his clip, a full credit there. We don't make any money anyway, so all good. But anyway, I'm going to stop there, guys. We can talk about that more, but let's throw it over to Scott Gregory. What did you think of that, my friend?
Yeah, thanks. We talked about what we grew up with, what we knew before. I was aware of Shocking Blue. I've mentioned before my mom was a music director at a radio station when I was younger. She would have been a teenager when this came out. And so just like we tend to gravitate towards what we listen to in our teens and 20s, so did she. And so until grade 8, when I got my own stereo and headphones, I was completely at her mercy. And so obviously I'd heard Venus before. A couple of these other tracks seemed familiar. And just like you, Alan, Love Buzz threw me for a loop at first because I'm like, what is this? I know, like, why do I know the lyrics? And then I was like, wait a minute. And I pulled out Bleach. And I was like, oh my God. Like, that is what this is. So I'm with you on that front. I don't know how quickly you realized. Well, I guess you told the story of that. But for me, it was, yeah, that wasn't what led me here. Obviously, you were. But that took me a moment. I was, like, really kind of looped out by that for a second. But it was interesting. You mentioned the British invasion there, Darren. And this was, like, a crazy year for albums, right? Like, Abbey Road came out. Tommy... King Crimson, we've reviewed them before. The Chord album came out this year. Both of the first Zeppelin albums came out in the same year. Like, there's tons of great music. People were pushing boundaries. Bowie had stuff coming out. And like you mentioned, in the Netherlands, there were bands like Brainbox was one that I saw. that was contemporary to them. And Golden Earring. This is before Golden Earring got big, though, right? Like Radar Love came much later, I think. But they were experimenting. It was, like they were going heavy. They were going psychedelic. And then that made it over the pond. And apparently, Robbie Van Leeuwen, they had mentioned that he wanted to basically turn the band when they switched the lead singer over to more like a Jefferson Starship type sound Jefferson Airplane, my mistake, with Grace Slick and stuff like that. And, I listened to the first album and it was like, okay, but I really like adding in Mariska was an amazing shift for them. And I think that really charted their success on this front. Even though, you would have had music composition and lyrics the same, or maybe not, because you'd be writing for a different lead singer, right? So I think that was an excellent move on their part. She has that very soulful voice, psychedelic riffs underneath it. They just really had a unique identity to them, I think, and that's what brought them over the pond. Overall, I liked the things we take for granted now, like the electric piano and like that sitar. There was a whole lot of Indian influence that was happening across a lot of those bands, especially the ones coming over from Britain and that. It was just that late 60s kind of sound. But then they're one of the first ones doing it, right? So it's always interesting when you have to place these things in context. And that's why I go back and look at those contemporaries, because you're like, okay, I'm used to this because I've heard it all at once. But were they in the front? Were they following along or what? And it's really interesting when you realize which bands are the ones that really started originating that sound. And this obviously Shocking Blue is one of them. I'd already mentioned Love Buzz for track highlights for me. I thought it was really good. It stands out. It's got that Eastern influence. It's kind of woozy and drifting and that. And it's really, I think, an example of what the Dutch sound was going for at that time with their rock and that. And then it's probably going to give you a Nirvana flashback when you do it. I liked Akaraga kind of for the same thing, that classical influence on it. It's instrumental, which I always like as a breakup on an album. If you get one or two instrumental tracks and give the band their flowers, I think it's really interesting when you see them take an instrument out, especially the vocals, and see if you can still hear a band in that music. And I think you very much can hear. You wouldn't be able to separate this from the rest of the album, I think. Long and Lonesome Road this is not one of their really strong early singles, and I recognized it. It's got that really steady beat to it. It's very emotional. I like it. The lyrics are simple, but they're wandering, they're searching. But she's, as you mentioned, she's just got that non-traditional female voice just in that lower register, and she's hard on it, for lack of a better word, right? Like, it's just, there's weight to her voice when she does it. So I really enjoyed that one. I think between that and Venus, I'd be hard pressed to say which one I liked more. Although I did like Hot Sand as well too. I think it's a more guitar driven track. It's got like a crunchy tone to it. It's starting that 70s hard rock sound that's coming out. It's just good. It's tight. It's really good. I like the aggressiveness on it. When you pair it with Venus, which actually happened on several international releases, I think it pairs really well. Other than that, I think, on the B side, I always try and call out one of the lesser known ones based on the Spotify counts for views and whatnot. Divorced 50 years from the actual album. I don't know how much you can count on that, but I really liked Wild Wind. It was slower. It's more atmospheric. It's got some bongos in there. When you surprise me with an instrument, it's nice. The percussion on it was really good, and it's kind of got like a desert psychedelic feel to it. The sitar in there again is just really fits this album, and yet carves out its own space to it. It's obviously not something you're going to hear on the radio, especially now, again, half a century later. So I suggest, giving it a go. Listen to the whole album, actually. Other than that, the American influence stuff like Harley Davidson and California Here I Come just sounded like American songs. So, which, I mean, that's not a bad thing. But, I thought more of the flavor of the Netherlands, and the European influence was more strongly felt on other cuts. But they're good. So yeah, overall, I really enjoyed it. There is some that I recognized. It was a flashback to the trauma of my youth, having no.
Yeah, interesting. It's fun to go last. The other thing is, I had somehow never heard of this band. Like, never ever once had I heard about it. Also, something that I usually don't do is read about the bands or the albums until I've listened to them for quite a long time, because I just kind of worry that I'll bias myself. So a lot of the stuff you have all mentioned, I've just learned in the last couple of days, because over the weekend I sort of read up on it a bit. But yeah, wow. 60s sound. I thought of the Mama and the Papas, and Jefferson Airplane popped into my head as soon as I started listening to this, right? I'm not sure if it's the guitar, the drums, the tambourine, the sitar, maybe all of it together. But wow, is a time period captured here, right? Particularly on Akaraga. I kept imagining Austin Powers the whole time. Every time I'd hear this album, but Akaraga particularly, yeah, I just couldn't stop thinking about Austin Powers. So it shows what an influence that movie had. Like, I don't know how it didn't have it on the sound. That sound had on that movie, and how it took and connected the two. I read on the weekend that John Mayer apparently actually covered Akaraga for a BBC Two television series theme, which is kind of interesting. Strangely, I don't really like Venus that much, which should be the track. But regardless, how many bands ever write one song that is globally known, right, for 50 years or so? So I think that feat, whether you call them a one-hit wonder or not, that's incredible, right? To write a tune that the entire planet knows, that sticks around, and we all now associate with women's razors, for those of us from Canada, is truly an incredible feat. Look, I always feel bad when an album doesn't land with me. And Alan, I feel a bit bad going into the next part here, because, it's not a bash on your pick, and I'm always glad we listen to what we listen to. But I'm not sure if this album and band influenced others, or others influenced this band and shaped it. But I just felt like, gosh, were they trying hard? Her voice really grated on me after about 3 or 4 tracks. I found it too much. Long and Lonesome was usually the low point in the audio journey of this album for me. And I really found it became kind of just a one-trick pony, one sound, and it really kind of irritated me and grounded on me again. Some interesting sounds and musicianship, but just repetitive, right? You have all brought up Love Buzz, and the first number of times I listened to it, it kept reminding me of a Cake beat, something that the band Cake would have. And I had no idea until I just read on the weekend that, oh, wow, Nirvana, as you all pointed out, recorded this, and it appeared on Bleach. No idea. But Love Buzz just kept striking me as a very Cake kind of beat. It's funny you liked Hot Sand, Scott, because that was the one that I thought was written by, like, grade 8ers, like, making love on the hot sand with you, or however it goes. I'm just like, oh, come on. This is real amateur lyrics here. That one was not great. So, look, I mean, this is completely on point with the experimental hippie sound of that time, the sitar, the Beatles. You mentioned George Harrison kind of introducing the sitar. Again, I want to dive deeper and learn, were they influencing, or were they influenced by, and were really trying hard to create an album that would land? I wondered about the 2 kind of American tracks. Scott Gregory wondering, okay, when they were creating this, like, hey, we need a couple tracks that are really going to go big in America, so let's put a couple in there. But I got to say, I'm voiced out and particularly sitared out. I think sitar is kind of interesting on a couple tracks. On an entire album, boy, I'm not sure. Anyway, fun listen, and I'll hand it over to you, Alan.
Great. Thank you, Scott. Interesting takes, all of you. All right. So, yeah, this album came out in 1969, and a lot of music from that era has endured well into this century. Which speaks to the influence and staying power. And I think At Home absolutely meets the mark of its contemporaries in that respect. It earns its reputation as a fascinating snapshot of European-flavored psychedelic rock. It's, smart, a little bit folksy. There's obviously some, I guess it's a little bit derivative of what the Americans were doing and the British were doing. but they had their own flavor to it. And I don't know, there was just something, there was like a hint of something dark and strange underneath this album that really appealed to me. This weird, slightly intangible psychedelic quality. That quality drew me to the album in the first place. As I was listening throughout the month, I noticed there was a really interesting sonic character to this album. And like you, Scott, I don't usually research too much until, after I've given it a few listens, because I don't want it to taint my perspective or whatever. And I also want to see what I can uncover just through listening. And a couple days ago, I learned that this album was self-produced by the band, and that totally made sense to me. It kind of contextualized what I was hearing. And at the risk of sounding like I'm doing the band a disservice, which is not my intention, the recordings felt a little unpolished. So yeah, the band recorded this and engineered it themselves. And I'm assuming charitably that they did this deliberately. It was less about crafting a flawless pop single. It was more about capturing a band playing together in a room. That's kind of what it sounds like. Nothing sounds quote unquote fixed in post. You know what I mean? Like, you can hear all the small imperfections. There's subtle tempo drifts. Instruments are reacting to one another. Harmonies aren't quite in sync. The endings kind of just fade or unravel. The vocals particularly have this like really great natural room reverb sound, not the kind that you would apply in a studio through technology. What else? Yeah, the drums likewise, they carried a natural room ambience, and the low end is warm but slightly muddy. There wasn't a ton of extreme EQ shaping or studio gloss applied. It all just sounds like a lived-in sort of audio documentary, if you will. Like a choice rooted in performance over perfection. That is the character that I picked up on this album. And I don't know if that was just the vibe they were going for, if that was a bit of a lack of experience behind the mixing board, and maybe this was common practice in that European psychedelic rock circle. I don't know, but it was just something that stood out to me, for better or worse. The album itself features incredible vocals by Mariska, as Darren and Scott Gregory both mentioned. I find her voice alluring, and there's a presence to it that I couldn't quite articulate, but Scott, I think you said it really well. There's weight behind it. There's like a character and a richness that you don't hear a lot. I've always been a fan of Grace Slick, and I love that now I've got this new sort of psychedelic female-fronted singer band thing to listen to as well. Van Leeuwen, obviously very talented, playing guitar and sitar and whatever else he did. And I have to respect his studio and production work, regardless of what I just said about the sonic characteristics. Like, audio production's hard, so the fact that they did it themselves is fantastic, and it doesn't sound bad. That's not what I was implying. I love a good old sitar. Scott, you're right. It definitely ties to a certain era, and that's that George Harrison influence, I guess. But and I have to give props to the bass and the drums, because they keep the time well, and they have a steady yet rhythmically fluid, vibe to it. Like, the songs feel bouncy in a way. Some standout tracks for me, obviously Love Buzz. That was the song that kind of kicked off this journey. I do like the sitar, and I think Mariska's voice and cadence and rhythm kind of all, it just, I don't know, it just hit the mark for me. The breakdown gets really, really trippy and weird, and I don't know, her accent is really endearing too. Like, can you hear my love buzz? The Dutch accent. It's cute. I don't know. Venus. I did not expect to like Venus as much as I did, because, like, I guess in my mind, just growing up with the Razor commercials or whatever, I always just kind of like brush that off as a girl song or whatever that means. But yeah, this is also a good trippy song. Like I love the guitar tone. The drums are tight and punchy. Mariska's voice once again kind of like rounds the song out really nicely. And yeah, it is a feminine song, but like the way she does it, like there's a weight to it, you know. Your desire, love that. And we all talked about Akaraga. I think it's the only instrumental track on this album, but like kind of cool, kind of catchy, kind of repetitive too, but that's okay. You know, the sitars are droning on and the rhythm section holds the time, and it's just, you know, I kept kind of bouncing along to it. It's as trippy as anything you'll ever hear from their contemporaries. I don't know if anyone mentioned this song, but Poor Boy, I really enjoyed. It's a brooding, sort of bluesy, minor key song. Feels really familiar and really sincere, even though you may have never heard it before. Like, there's just something about it that has that, like, familiarity. A bit of a call and repeat thing in the chorus that kept getting stuck in my head. So, yeah, overall, just like a really interesting album to kind of sit with. And, you know, with all of the recording imperfections plus the natural warmth that I get from a record player, like I really enjoyed kind of stewing on this album over the last month. So yeah, all right, let's round it on home and get some final thoughts and some scores here. I'll throw it over to Darren.
Thanks, Alan. Yeah, it's funny you brought up her accent because when she recorded this album, did not know English at all. So she just memorized the words and how they sounded. Actually, so on the track Venus, the original recording, they wrote down, it's supposed to Goddess on the Mountaintop, but they wrote it down Godness incorrectly. And there was another part in the song where she's supposed to say eyes, and she says ass. But it has been fixed, but if you find one of the original records and it has those, basically bastardized lyrics, it's worth way more. But because she didn't know, and they didn't even catch it, they just released it. The original album was released that way. Venus was released like 3 times before it caught on, and it caught on huge in Europe at one point, and it wasn't until then they kind of re-recorded it and then got it in the States, and that's kind of second big thing. And then, as you know, Bananarama in the 80s. So it was super interesting. To me, this is a big album. I think this is a big, archaeological find. I was super pumped when I got into this, and it does sound a bit dated at times. I get it's from the time. I get the sitar and all that stuff can kind of get a little, dated and annoying and maybe not modern, but there's so much there. And they went more bass driven. They added more fuzz. They basically indied it up, right? Like, so think of this at the time, Pet Sounds and the Beatles come out, but really the Americana that was coming out was these polished type Beatles, or not Beach Boys songs, things like that. Apologies, I said Beatles. But, I think they just gave everything an edge. Same thing with Krautrock. I think there's here, and, I was doing some really digging, and it was just like, these, it's that 7 Degrees to Kevin Bacon. And they really took that band and that movement at that time. And really, it's a real quick line to the Pixies crediting them and how they played. And the Pixies copied a lot of their style and the bass driven and kind of the grooves that it would go and then kind of slow down and speed up. And then, of course, that goes to Nirvana. And obviously, Cobain recorded that on Bleach. And also a big influence on Jack White. And there's like 3 or 4 times there's guitar intros. Next time you listen to it, think it's a Jack White song. And you're like, oh my God, this sounds like something Jack White would absolutely do. There is a direct line to this complete indie grunge punk movement from this band. And yeah, I think that obviously there were some great influences before. They came from that, the Rolling Stones, and they were getting all these, the Beatles and all those bands as well with the American, but they kind of blended it all up, gave it its own funky groove, added a strong female presence. There's a lot of firsts in there. It's easy to look back and be like, okay, it sounds a bit dated. data, but a lot at the time, this was first in all these movements. I think this is a gem. For me, I'm going to give it all fours, honestly. I think I get how it could sound dated, but go back and just think of that in your head about how it influenced these other bands and just kind of blended things together, but kept it simple. Cobain was big in that too. He was the first to say he wasn't the biggest punk. He kind of thought he was a bit of a sellout because he knew Nirvana songs would be catchy. He designed them that way. It's exactly what they did. He copied that style. So to me, all fours. Send Me a Postcard. Listen to that song too. It was on the next album, Dynamite. But thanks, Alan. For me, awesome pick. Love this. I am going to find that vinyl. I'm disappointed to hear I can't find it locally because I was just about to look for it. All right, back to you, Scott Gregory.
Yeah, so remember, Alan said he couldn't find it locally, not that you couldn't find it locally. So, well, challenge has been extended. I mean, you stole a lot of my thunder on that, right? Like, I'm going back to what you said and then what Alan said about strong female vocals. Like, I like my L7. I like my Veruca Salt. I like strong vocals. You know, Belinda Carlisle is more poppy, but you look back in the day and you talk about Grace Slick, you talk about a Janis Joplin, you know, and this is just, Mariska is another addition on that list of just pioneering really strong rock punk style women coming forward and carving a space. And, you know, it's interesting because Robbie went out with the intention to make that happen, right? And so I think there is a bit, I don't even want to call it artificial. I'll call it intentional. There was intention behind this, right? But you can say the same thing about ABBA. Everything they did was absolutely intentional and just crafted right down to the last minutia. And I don't think that's a bad thing. Like, if you're creating a studio album and you're trying to create an experience and push the envelope in that, you kind of have to be intentional with everything that you do. And so, you know, I didn't mention the Butterfly and I on the first pass, but you look at the rhythm section there and the horns that were in there and how they were used differently there and had more of a soulful edge compared to some of the other side of things. And again, you know, they change up the sound track by track to really try and build something different. And I deeply appreciate that. I think they did have a lot of influence going forward. They do sound a lot like what was happening, but I think it's like in that era, in that late 60s, early 70s. But there is that, I don't even want to call it compromise. You have to have an eye on the commercial if you're trying to break in, right? You can't forget you're in a business, but you also want to maintain your artistic integrity. And I think this album is full of artistic integrity, originality, creativity, and that echoes through the decades all the way to us now. So I'm with Darren. I give this 4 across the boards. There's a number of these songs that are going to make it into my 60s, 70s playlists, and it's going to carry forward in my library. What about you, Scott?
Yeah, I'm sorry again, Alan. It's funny how we can differ so much on picks, right? Darren, 4s all across. Scott, you're pretty high as well. Look, I'm super glad we listened to this. Like, no regret at all, right? It's neat to again discover the band who came up with Venus. Again, a song that's known globally 55 plus years later. Like, that's an incredible feat on its own, right? So very happy to have gone down this road. It definitely speaks to an exact time period and what was going on with many other bands. We've mentioned the Beatles, we've mentioned Jefferson, Airplane, and whatnot. Influence, I got to give it a 1 just because I don't think it's going to take me down a road of looking for more sitar, or I know the music of that period reasonably well. Recommend, I'll give it a 3. Just again, if you're trying to understand the story of music and the history of music, why would you ignore this one? It's worth a listen. We pulled out a couple standout tracks. Love Buzz. I've got to now listen to their Nirvana version. I'm not so sure I've ever heard their Nirvana version. And Akaraga, pretty cool. Overall, though, I'm just going to give it a 2. Again, I found it kind of repetitive. I think it's got an EP worth of songs in there. Not so sure an entire album, and it just grated on me over time. But again, glad to have had the experience. Over to you, Alan.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I appreciate your take. Yeah, guys, I took a chance on this one. I don't usually spend money on vinyl unless I already know that I'm gonna like the album, or at least most of it, because there are no skip buttons on record players, and records are not cheap, especially new ones. Um, Love Buzz was really the only song I'd actually listened to in full, and my quick scan through the tracks on Spotify all those months ago, it was alone enough to give me confidence to drop the cash on this. And for the record, literally, it arrived on a pink vinyl, which is fun, but I feel like that was a missed opportunity because a shockingly blue slab of wax would have been perfect. But that's just a minor gripe. Was it worth it? Absolutely. My scores may not numerically quantify how much I did like this album. Overall, I'm giving it a 3 out of 5. I think it was really good. It was perfectly imperfect. The songwriting is catchy. Plenty of hooks kept me coming back. And sonically, I just found it refreshing and unique. There's always going to be a time and a place for an album like this in my rotation. And a number of these songs will find their way onto various playlists for me. So that's always usually the sign of a good Sonic Collective experience. My score would have been higher on influence, but actually, Scott Coates, you said something that made me pause and reconsider.
For influence, I'm dropping my score down a little bit from a 4 to a 3.
The point you made was like who influenced who. This band, obviously, like they influenced Nirvana and Bananarama and John Mayer and potentially any number of other contemporary musicians, but they were also influenced by what the Brits and the Americans were doing in the psychedelic rock space. They were probably fans of the Beatles, so and Van Leeuwen brought in Mariska partially to emulate what Jefferson Airplane was already doing. So did they create their own sound? I think so. They Shocking Blue carved their own path the Dutch way, and the fact they influenced so many other artists speaks to their staying power. Recommend, I'm gonna give it a 3 because is it for everyone? Probably not, right? The reasons I love it are probably the same reasons that other people wouldn't. I've personally always been drawn to that late 60s rock, psychedelia, Woodstock vibe, but a number of times throughout the month I kept wondering, like, what would our fallen comrade Owen think of an album like this from the perspective of Generation Z, if you nasty. And he's also got an audio engineering background. And like I mentioned, the production side of this album was imperfect relative to like what we're accustomed to. So yeah, I would have been interested to hear another audio guy's take. But as a psychedelic album, your mileage may vary, and ultimately, if you happen to listen to it while imbibing in a mind-altering substance, you may enjoy it more or you may enjoy it less. But yeah, so yeah, that was Shocking Blue for March of 2026. Kind of a mixed review. I think most of us liked it, but Scott Coates, you're the odd man out today, and that's okay.
Wow.
Get off my lawn.
All right. Get off my lawn. All right, Scott Gregory, I think you're up next.
It is indeed me. So you guys have challenged me the last couple months, and I kind of liked it. I liked getting put out of my comfort zone, and it was always the electronica and that was pushing me the most. So when I went out looking for an album this month, those were the two things. I was looking for something with a little more of an electronic sound, and something not too hard, because I only ever really listened to industrial coming up, so it wasn't too hard to think of pushing out of my comfort zone. 9 Inch Nails is nice. Alan's pointing at his shirt. So
I'm wearing a 9 Inch Nails shirt.
Yeah. So I started digging around, and there was an album that actually had like the story and the mythology around it really pulled me in before I even listened to a single track off of it. And we're going to be listening to This Is Happening 2010 by LCD Sound System. it's just a really different kind of album, right? And I think it's another one that's very meticulously crafted, so it would have that in common with Shocking Blue here. A very kind of off the standard blueprint. James Murphy, the lead singer slash main architect of the band, really called it the band's final record. Like, this was it. The band was going to be done. He felt like he'd aged out of the genre. When they recorded it, they got a house in Los Angeles, and there was an all-white dress code. Like, it was like a funeral kind of thing going on. It was really meant to be like they had a final concert that they made a 4-hour documentary out of. They eventually, spoiler, make another album 5 years later. But at the time, everything going into this is the last, we're at the top of our craft, where, we're going to do one last hurrah and exit stage left. So I'm very interested in hearing what you all have to think about it, and then seeing how it hits me as well as I give it, much more exhaustive listening over the next month.
Cool. Heard of this band? Never listened to their entire album, so very intrigued.
Yeah, me neither. Yeah.
Yeah, I hadn't even heard of them before this, so I was never big into the dance scene other than going out and dancing to the music, but it never followed me home, right? So this is going to be a very interesting time for me as well.
Do they have a single that I might have heard?
Yeah, they're well
they have a few
known in
big
that
hits.
sphere.
I don't know this album exactly, but they've got some big hits. I know. I have several of their stuff on playlists. I've listened to a couple of their albums, but I don't own any. And yeah, I'm pumped to get into this one.
Do you know "Dance Yourself Clean"? That was the big one off of this album.
Maybe if I heard it.
Well, you're going to.
I guess. Sometimes. Yeah, I'm looking forward to this one. That's going to be a cool pick.
Sweet.
All right. Well, on behalf of the Sonic Collective, you heard it here. Scott Gregory's next pick is This Is Happening, the 2010 album from LCD Sound Systems. Thank you so much for your continued support here at the Sonic Collective. We truly appreciate it. If you made it to the end, you are a true gangster and worthy of a high five. On behalf of the Sonic Collective, I have been Alan, with Darren Scott, Scott Gregory, and Scott Coates signing off until next month.
Hey, thanks for joining us on the Sonic Collective, where we've explored the music, the history, and the impact of some of the greatest albums of all time. We hope you've enjoyed our discussions and gained new insights and appreciation for the music you and we love. Join us next month for another exciting album, and until then, keep listening to great music.